Thank you, everybody, for joining today. Before we dive in, I want to quickly introduce Salto for those of you who may not be familiar with us, because yes, we do more than just organize cool webinars with Rachel. Salto is a configuration management platform that helps Jira admins take control of their configuration without manual headaches. So with Salto, you can automatically move configuration changes from sandbox to production. You can see where elements like custom fields and automations are used, so you can make changes without breaking dependencies. You can test and validate updates before they go live. You can also document and track changes in Git or whatever repo you're using, making it easier to troubleshoot or roll back whatever configuration changes you just introduced. Salto simplifies the most frustrating parts of Jira administrations, and so you can spend less time firefighting and more time optimizing. And we happen to have a free 30-day trial for new users, so I'll make sure to post that link in the comments. And that's it for me. So Rachel, the stage is yours from now on.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm going to shut off my camera during the presentation just because bandwidth on the road is always a consideration, but I'll come back for the Q&A and say hi again. Let me do that real quick. Okay, excellent. So I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me. As I said, I'm Rachel Wright. I'm a certified Jira administrator and author of the Jira Strategy Admin Workbook. And I've been working on the road since 2015. So that's why I say bandwidth on the road is sometimes challenging. And I'm joining you today from that RV in the picture. And as I said, I'm in Florida today in the United States. So today, Salto and I have partnered to present today's topic, and it's the Proactive Jira Admin's Guide to Success. So success in Jira is always our goal. I've been using Jira since 2011, and I was certified in 2016, and now I'm an independent consultant. So I'll share with you a typical day in the life of a senior Jira admin. So here's our agenda for today. First, we'll discuss the first thing I do every day as a Jira administrator. And then we'll talk about why tracking configuration changes is so important for me to effectively manage my work. Next, I'll show you a common request and how I address it. And then we'll talk about ways to be proactive and anticipate change, because if there's nothing else, Jira is always changing, right? And then we'll talk about some ways to automate repetitive admin tasks. And after, I'll share some resources so you can continue your own Jira learning. And finally, I'll answer any questions you have. All right, so let's get started. So first, I have some questions for you to think about while we're talking about these different topics. First question is, as a Jira admin, when you log into your computer each day, what's the first thing that you do? Next question is, how do you track the changes that you make in your Jira application? Third question is, are you a proactive or a reactive administrator? And the last question for you to think about is, what admin tasks do you outsource or delegate to your colleagues? All right, so let's talk about my first action each day as a Jira admin. I start each day by launching a custom Jira dashboard like this one to see what Jira config or maintenance tasks are on my personal to-do list. Now, this dashboard is purposely simple. On the left are some tasks that are due today, and in the middle are tasks to focus on next. And on the right are new requests that came in yesterday that just haven't been reviewed or prioritized yet. And of course, if you don't like dashboards, you can use queues or filters to see the work. And the point here is just to make sure that you have a distraction-free view of what to focus on right now and filter out all the other distractions that are competing for your attention. So as a Jira admin, what are some ways that we can minimize all those distractions? Now, I've communicated to my users that only requests that are submitted from Jira are reviewed and prioritized. So that means I free myself up and other admins too from answering phone calls, emails, chat messages, or from people randomly coming by my desk. After years of doing this, my users know better. I stole this strategy from a QA manager that I worked with once, and she had a sign on her wall and it read, "What is the Jira number?" And she would only answer your question if you came to her with the Jira issue ID first. Otherwise, she wouldn't even listen to it. So eventually, people, including me, we got the hint and made sure that all the work was logged in Jira. So I've kind of carried that forward and made sure that everybody I work with is logging their work as well. So next, you need a prioritization process. Now, hopefully, ideally, your organization includes Jira application work as part of its overall strategy, and the configuration work that you do is prioritized along with corporate strategic initiatives. But I realize we're not all that lucky. If they're not doing that for you, you might just have to raise your hand and do it yourself. But not to worry, here are some factors to consider to create your own simple prioritization process. So first, I look at urgency. How urgent is the request, and when would the requester like it done by? Now, of course, keep in mind that a requester's urgency might differ from reality, but it's a good starting point. I like to let the requester initially set a priority field, and then I change it later based on relative priority. And I also ask the user to fill in a custom date field called requested. And I use the standard date field to set completion expectations. It's also helpful when I want to see the difference between date requested and date actually fulfilled. Next, how many users are impacted by this requested change, or who would benefit from the change? And then what is the cost of the change? Now, this might be a monetary cost, like an app license fee, or a resource cost, like 3 hours of my time. And also there's opportunity costs to consider. So if I'm working on this request, it means that other requests are not getting fulfilled. And then also consider if there's a cost to not taking action at this time. Another tip for minimizing distractions is taking control of your time. Easier said than done, right? So as a Jira admin, there are a million tasks vying for my attention, but there are only 48 hours in one day, right? That's a joke. Only 8 hours in a day. So as I mentioned, when I start work, I check my Jira dashboard first, and I try to complete the day's priorities before I start anything else. And that includes attending meetings and checking email. Try not to do that at all in the morning. If I check email first thing in the morning, I'm immediately distracted. I find myself working on something other than my highest priority work, and nothing ever gets done. Next, and this has been so helpful for me, I outsource meeting scheduling. So I let users and customers schedule meetings directly on my calendar. And this way, there's no back and forth availability conversations. I just provide them a link to my calendar, and the user just chooses a time that we're both available. No more surprise meetings, double bookings, or reserving conference numbers. Now, I use Calendly.com, but there are many similar meeting scheduling applications out there. Especially if you work with any external contacts, I highly recommend looking into one of these apps to manage it for you. All right, so what else do you notice about my schedule? Well, first, I don't schedule meetings on Mondays or Fridays. That doesn't mean I'm not working. It just means I use those days to focus on completing specific projects instead. Also, I don't schedule meetings before 10 a.m. You can see that on the right. So this allows me to accomplish high priority items before the barrage of meetings begin. Otherwise, you have 11 meetings in the day and no time to do any work, right? Now, I know not all of you are going to have this much freedom with your schedule. That's one benefit of working for yourself that I enjoy. But the point is, try to block off some focus time so you can accomplish something meaningful each day. All right, so now that I can effectively manage my own work, I need to effectively manage the application support. So how do you manage your application support today? And if the answer is via email or on paper or not at all, well, now's a great day to reevaluate your process. There's no way to know how much time Jira takes to support or what type of help is most frequently needed if you don't track it. Otherwise, you're just buried in paperwork. All right, so where should support requests be collected and tracked? Well, that's right, folks. My opinion, the best way to track Jira administration work is right in Jira. So here's a simple Jira Service Management Cloud portal that I use for collecting user, Jira, and Confluence administration requests. And if you don't have JSM, no problem. Here's an example using a business Jira project in server or data center, same idea. This tracking method has helped me for years and it works perfectly, except if Jira is unexpectedly down. So just keep that in mind. It doesn't work too well when you're upgrading data center and you need to look at your Jira issues. So here's why I recommend tracking all your Jira changes in Jira. First, logging configuration changes is really the only way to know what multiple admins are working on at the same time. And having a change request record lets everyone review, prioritize, and plan for that change. Now, even if you're the only Jira administrator, these records are often useful in the future when looking back and wondering why a certain change was made. I can't tell you how many times I look back 6 months ago or a year ago. Why is that setting that way? Who would have done that? Oh, I did that. Why did I do it? Well, at least I logged the reason, and that's really helpful before I go and try to undo it. So also when an issue is complete, it serves as a legal and historical record of what was done. The Jira does have some audit logs, but none of them seem to really tell the complete story. So here's an example config change record from Jira Cloud's automation log. And this one shows what was changed. But here's a second change record for the same automation rule. And this was just indicates that some change was made, but doesn't provide any detail. So this isn't helpful to me. And the only way to know who made a change, what change was made, how it was accomplished, and why is to record your own changes. So next, let's take a look at a common Jira request that I would address in any given day. So here's one. Some really picky person requested to rename a custom field. So in the facilities Jira project, there's a multi-select field called building, and the field name really should be plural, not singular. So it sounds like a really simple request, right? We can change the name of a custom field in about 30 seconds. But I always say that knowing the best way to solve a problem and how it will impact your application in the future is the difference between a good administrator and a great one. So let's be proactive about this. Let's try to think of the potential impacts of this change before we make it. What might break and where should we check? So the first thing I do is I would make a list of everywhere that select fields are used in my application. Bonus points for anybody who recognizes what these drop-down addresses are. All right, so select fields can be used in all sorts of places in Jira. So here's a partial list, right? Filters, boards, workflow behaviors like validators, conditions, and post functions, automation rules, third-party apps, custom scripts, all over the place. And if it's a user picker field, they can also be embedded in notification, permission, and issue security schemes. So don't forget to check there too. So next, I figure out which objects will break when these field names are changed. And obviously test this in a sandbox environment, but if you don't have one, create a temporary custom field, add it to objects in a test Jira project, and then change the temporary field's name to see the impacts. It's the easiest way to see what you're about to accomplish. All right, so here's what happens if I rename a custom field. Jira handles the rename in some places, but not all. And filters and automation rules break and will need to be updated manually. So now that we know what will break, how do we handle it? But first, we need to understand, how many objects are we talking about here? Is one thing going to break or 100 things going to break? So if it's just a few automations, it's not a big deal. But I have 200 automation rules. And the idea of searching through all of them, I'd have to open them all up, Click on all the triggers, the branches, the conditions, the actions, just to look for a broken embedded custom field like in this screenshot. That does not sound like fun. And the same is true for private and shared filters, which power boards, dashboards, plans, and reports. They'll just break. So what are our options here? In cloud, except for opening all the filters and manually checking them one by one, there's no real way to proactively manage breakage. But in server and data center, you can query the database for uses of the field by either its name or its unique ID. So in this example, the SQL query is searching the rec content table or field in the search request table for uses of that custom field. So now at least I understand what's going to break, which filters they are, and who owns them. Now for automation rules, luckily both in cloud and server and data center, we can export them in JSON format. And then just simply open the file in a text editor and search for the field name as shown in this snippet. So even if you don't read XML or JSON, you could do a simple search and still find this information. All right, so that's still a lot of work, right? So I bet you're wondering, is there a better way to find all the impacted objects? And luckily there is, using Salto Configuration Manager for Jira. So let me show you how that works. So simply connect your Jira Cloud or data center application to Salto. You just enter a few connection details in this easy to use wizard. And then you have Salto fetch or go retrieve all your application's configuration data. And it's very quick. Within minutes, you can see all the objects in your Jira software or Jira service management application. And then next, I'm going to use the Explore tab to search my configuration. So I entered the name of a custom field, and Salto found it in multiple elements, files, and content records for me to explore. So for example, here are some saved filters that's using that custom field I'm about to change. So now I can plan to update these immediately after I change the field. And here's the automation rule that uses the custom field in one of its conditions. So with Salto, I can plan and find all the potential impacts of a change before I make it. And I can also use Salto to make a change in my sandbox environment, fix any breakage there, and then deploy the changes to production. All right, so let's talk about strategies for being a proactive Jira administrator. So none of us want to be mediocre admins or have an application that only sort of meets our users' needs, right? So let's talk about reactive first. Being reactive means acting in response to something or someone. And with this model, everything is an emergency, and I've got to act now to put out a burning fire. So I prefer to be proactive, which means working to prevent a fire from starting in the first place. Again, easier said than done, but a great goal. All right, so let's use our previous example of filter breakage. So a reactive strategy would be hoping that renaming a custom field won't have any impact and not even bothering to check. And when you don't bother to check, you wait to see if users report any problems and rely on them to fix them themselves. Don't like that strategy, usually. Now, I will be honest and I'll say there's been a time or two that I have used this strategy on purpose. So sometimes I think there's an object that's really not used, and waiting to see if anyone notices can be useful. So if you're going to do that, just make sure that you're purposely choosing a reactive strategy rather than just, being lazy. All right, so if we're being proactive, like we should be, we should anticipate that there will be breakage. We should do some research to understand the scope and the impact of that breakage. And then wouldn't it be nice if we helped users fix their filters after the name change? So there are two ways that I help users. First, if it's a manageable number of filters to address, I'll change the filter owner to myself, I'll update the JQL, and I'll change the owner back to the user. But while you're in there, a nice proactive thing to do might be to add the Jira administrators group to the editor role So it's easy to update the JQL next time that there's a change. So that's pretty proactive, don't you think? Nice to have. And then if there are too many filters for me to handle or update on my own, sometimes I ask users for assistance. So here's an example email message I might send. And let's go through the different parts of it real quick. So I start off by telling the user exactly when the change will occur and what impacts are expected. And then I tell them what actions they need to take, and I always like to provide an example. And I also provide an alternate solution, which is removing any filters that they're no longer using or that are needed. So, why not take an opportunity to do a little cleanup too here while we're at it, right? Yay, productive again. All right, so finally, for each user, I make a clickable list of their impacted filters so they don't have to go hunting for them. Sometimes I even provide the name of the filter, just depends on how long the list is. Now, some users, yep, they're going to ignore this notification and do nothing. Certainly, that's expected. But I've found that this strategy has a high success rate, and users definitely appreciate advanced notification that you're going to break their stuff. So next, let's talk a little bit about the consequences of not being proactive. So Jira does not manage itself. I remember when cloud came out, everybody was so excited. We won't need admins anymore. Well, that's not the case, as you know. And assuming that Jira manages itself has a cost. So let's talk about that. It's much easier to plan for growth and incrementally manage your configuration than just suddenly realize it's grown out of control and now you have a mess. So when you're constantly reacting to change, every request becomes an emergency, and there's no time to manage actual emergencies like unplanned breakage. Next, Atlassian and marketplace vendors are adding new features and changing functionality all the time. So if you're not keeping up with release notes and announcements, you'll be surprised when things unexpectedly change. I remember very specifically, we came into work one day, the UI had totally changed and I wasn't prepared for it. Okay, well, Jira still worked, but all of my users were confused and didn't know what to do. And I wasn't prepared to, one, receive all the help requests and fulfill all the help requests. And also, I had to figure out what changed as well for myself. So I was totally unprepared for just some simple UI changes. You don't want your users to be the ones reporting, the application works differently today than it did yesterday. So next, what if a feature or an app that you depend on stopped working? Would you have the bandwidth to quickly respond to it? And finally, unplanned effort can increase costs. So that cost could be in actual money, in resources, or in opportunities that you could otherwise be focusing on. So instead, here are some ways to be proactive and productive. First, I recommend that you commit to regularly scheduled maintenance. As I mentioned, Jira does not maintain itself. So start by identifying what tasks your application needs you to perform, and then select the frequencies that fit your specific needs and availability. So to help you with that, you can download a free scheduled maintenance worksheet from my website for some example tasks that I routinely perform. And then next, inactive users and unused schemes, unneeded objects, all the stuff needs to be cleaned up regularly. So I suggest a quarterly audit where you detect and remove unneeded configuration data. It'll speed up your application to not have all that stuff in the background and also make it easier for you to manage as a Jira admin. And of course, some routine administration tasks can be automated, so you should take advantage of that where it's possible. And we'll talk more about automation next. All right, and it's not enough to simply just say you have a test environment. You've got to keep its configuration in sync with production and have the right amount of test data there so it's useful and actually ready to use when you need it. The worst thing in the world is to need to go test something and then I figure out my environment isn't ready for that test, and then I burn a couple hours reconfiguring it or syncing data. Salto can help you keep your configuration up to date though. So next, there's always more to learn and new features are added all the time. So as a Jira admin, you've got to seek out new opportunities to keep up with constant change. So check out my 9 ways to learn Jira administration article on my website. And here you'll find many learning resources and some creative ideas like do a side-by-side comparison of 2 Jira applications, or research the answer to a question from the Atlassian community, or break something on purpose in a test environment, of course. That's the best way to learn. And finally, change in Jira and change in life is constant. So the only way to handle it is to anticipate it and have plans in place for when it happens. My personal motto is expect the worst and hope for the best. All right, so let's talk a little bit about automating repetitive admin tasks. So automation means making a process or a system operate automatically, or at least with a little bit less effort from you. So I approach using automation in 3 different ways. I use automatic calculations, alerts and notifications, and assignment and delegation. And here are some examples for each of those categories. So you remember that prioritization process we talked about earlier? So why not turn that into a scoring system to help determine what requests to focus on? And here are some examples to get you started. Obviously, you'll have to customize this to your use case and your needs. But your scoring system could either be relative with values like high, medium, or low, or you could use numbers to calculate and sum a total score. I've done that before. Then you store that total score in a custom field so you can use it to rank issues for scheduling. Next, I like to use alerts and notifications to catch undesired conditions like unassigned issues being worked or issues missing important data like their estimates or start dates, due dates, versions, sprints. Sometimes I'm looking for undesired user behavior where a little bit of user education would be helpful. So how do I do that? I create a dashboard just like this. I call it Jira Data Checks. And this dashboard's only job is to find issues that need attention. And ideally, there are never any issues on this board, right? When I launch this board, I want to see it looking exactly like this, no issues to follow up on. But when there are problems, this makes it easy to find them. You could also use filter subscriptions or automation rules to deliver this information to you or to others via email. So next, I set up alerts in Salto to learn about configuration changes that are being made by other admins. So I've got 3 alerts here. I think we have time, so I would like to show you these live. I'm going to attempt to switch to a browser. There we go. And so my first alert here catches custom field creations. And let me open up the config so you can see it. So Salto can search for modifications, additions, deletions, or all 3. And in this simple example, I'm just looking for any custom field that's created. And I'm using a simple syntax here to call for that. And then I'm asking Salto to notify me via email, but you can also get a notification from Slack. So very simple. I hate it when others create custom fields, so this is a good way to be alerted to it if they didn't tell me before they were going to do it. So the next example, I'm monitoring for a change to users in issue security schemes. So for me, my most sensitive Jira issues are protected with issue security, and I wouldn't want the wrong users added in the wrong place. So again, I'm using simple syntax for what change I'm looking for. I'm looking for any modification, and I'm getting an alert if that happens via email. And my third example here, I'm watching for any modification, addition, or deletion of a project role. And in this example, I'm using a quick drop-down list to pick what I'm looking for instead of the syntax, right? So I've checked project role, and Salto will tell me if any change has been made to a project role. So that's super helpful. All right, let me jump back to PowerPoint. Okay, and then additionally, I like to take advantage of Jira's automatic assignment capabilities so I can delegate tasks to other people when possible. So in this application support project, this is where I'm tracking all my Jira configuration changes. I've set up component leads, so only requests for Bitbucket, Jira, and Confluence are assigned to me. And for cases where assignment is determined later in the workflow, you can use an automation rule to do the assignment instead. As you probably know, the assignment only happens on the create action with the component. So if you're doing your assignment later, you'll have to make that assignment automated in a different way, not with the component. So here are some tasks that you should delegate to others or automate. First, use the new user access global groups in Jira Cloud to delegate user management activities like adding users, making users inactive, and adding and removing them from groups. Of course, you could also connect Jira to central user management tools. I really like that Atlassian finally separated this out, right? I never understood why people with user management access needed application admin access too. So now they're separate, and I love that. And then next, why not delegate prioritization efforts up to leadership? So yeah, I just said delegate something to your boss. But there's no reason that people doing the prioritization need to be Jira admins. They just need to understand how changes impact the application. Wouldn't it be nice if you could focus on the actual work and not have to also focus on the prioritization? So delegate that out if you can. And then finally, delegate admin audit tasks, like checking that no new security roles or admin users were added with apps like Salto. And finally, here are some tasks that you should delegate to project level administrators. I like to select a lead for every Jira project. I give them project level admin permissions, and then I use them as an initial point of contact for all end user questions. All right, so here are the links that we discussed in this presentation. I'll give you a second to take a quick screenshot. And then it's time for the most interesting part of the day, Q&A. So I will launch Zoom's Q&A feature. And if you have a question, please feel free to type it in there. And that left to all right, I know the Q&A button is here. I have seen it. I'm looking for it. I don't see it right now. So give me 1 second. Oh, it's hiding under the More menu. Okay, excellent. All right, thank you. We have a couple questions. Hi, Rich. Nice to see you. Thanks for being here.
Rachel,
So the
you're
first,
still sharing your screen and we can't see you. You might want to stop the screen
oh,
sharing.
thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, I think I got it now. Is it working?
Yep, perfect.
Thank you. I need to do Zoom training apparently, right? I have Zoom, I use Zoom. I don't use Zoom enough. I will learn. Okay, so Rich asks, is the Jira request dashboard built around a specific assignee or requests owned by a Jira support group? Is it query or gadget based? I love that question. So what I tell everyone, whether it's for Jira config requests or any dashboards or boards you're building, always build them audience focused, right? Don't try to build one big dashboard that answers multiple questions for multiple audiences. So for me, the example that I showed in the presentation, it is just things that I am personally interested in, right? So for me, it's query based. It says only show current user. I think I use the function current user, and that helps me see exactly what I'm doing. Um, and then the next question is, I don't know if I got all of that question, but I think I answered all of it. Can you confirm if you're using a JSM portal, but have the work items directly in Jira rather than a JSM project queue itself? So I've done it both ways. Way back when, before Jira Cloud, when I only had Jira Server and there was no JSM or Jira Service Desk back then, I did use a business project and tracked all Jira configuration requests in that Jira business project. And then now that we have the ability of JSM, now I use JSM because it's just easier. But they both work. I even wrote a little HTML gadget. If you know what the portal looks like, the customer portal in JSM where there are request forms, I wrote a little HTML gadget to put in my dashboard that had a little icon and a little link to the request form, which was the create screen. So essentially, I was creating Jira Service Desk before Jira Service Desk was a thing. Both work. Thanks, Rich. Okay, next question. Oh, thank you for taking my LinkedIn learning courses on Jira and Confluence. I appreciate that. I guess I should just read it. Hi, Rachel. Thank you for giving this session. I learned Jira from LinkedIn courses given by you. It has helped me a lot. I have a question. Is Jira integratable with IBM Rational? That's a software I don't know. RDNG for requirements. May I know the procedure or workaround for it? So before we move that question, because there's a second part to it. I'm sorry, I don't know that specific software, but the best thing to do is just type Jira plus the name of whatever other application that you're trying to integrate to in Google and see what comes up. Also check the vendor's website to see if they have any Jira integrations, and check marketplace.atlassian.com. A lot of times there are like full apps that help push data back and forth. Sometimes there are connector apps, which will at least push data one way or another. And then the poor man's solution is if you cannot find an integration, and you can't build it yourself, you don't have any development skills or interest, you can at least send data from your application to Jira by email. So you can use not an issue collector, I'm sorry, a mail handler in Jira software or Jira work management. And you could use the different address to get issues into a Jira service management project. So that's sometimes an option. And the second part of the question is how to keep track of requirements in Jira. Can you please showcase it? So I don't always track requirements in Jira. I prefer to track them in Confluence if I have Confluence. And a lot of times when I show customers that you could create a table of requirements in Confluence and then in one click, make them all into Jira issues, that is a huge selling point for folks that are willing to use Confluence, but who are a little intimidated by Jira. So track requirements. Essentially, I mean, you could make each requirement its own Jira issue, and then it each has its own assignee and its own workflow. Instead of like, I saw somebody yesterday tracking requirements in a spreadsheet. So every time something was actually accomplished in Jira, they had to go back to the spreadsheet and update the status there. And that double work should tell you that that's not the best way. I always tell people step away from the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet is always out of date. And the second you export data from Jira, it's no longer the truth. So I hope that answers your question. The next question is, does cleaning up schemes or request types impact reporting or exporting of data? Well, yeah, absolutely. If you're deleting data, it won't be available for export or reporting. So that's something you should think about. Now, one thing to know, just removing a field from a screen, like let's say you have a Jira project and you have a field on the screen for a while and people are adding data to it. And then a year later, you decide to remove that field from the screen. Now that data that's already been entered, that's still there. It hasn't been lost. It's just not visible to the user. So that's one thing to know. So before I delete, let's just say a custom field, I will look and see how much usage that custom field had. So how much data exists. And if it's a lot, and if it's still useful data, I'll take that data and I'll push it into another field that we are going to keep around, or I'll push it into the description field, or I'll push it into a comment to let me free up that field and delete it without deleting the data. And there's a couple ways you can do it. You can do it with scripting. You can do it with a post function in a workflow, or you can use an automation rule to copy data from one field to another. Okay, hopefully that answers it. If I'm not answering your questions, come back and ask again and I'll try again. Okay, next question. What would be the impact of AI to Jira administration? Oh, that's a great question, to Jira administration work. So just like I said earlier, that when cloud came by, everyone was like, yay, we don't need administrators anymore. I think the same is true with AI. I think AI is going to be a great companion. I don't think it's going to take all of our work away. Some decisions, you just need a human to weigh the pros and cons and make that decision. So think about like when other innovations, right? I don't have a great example, but like let's say you went from the horse and buggy to the automobile. It changed the way we travel, right? But we still travel and we still need people to create wheels. And they're not creating wheels for the horse and buggy, they're creating rubber tires for the car. So I think it will change the way we work, but I think the type of work that we need to be doing is going to be the same. No, this is just my opinion. I don't have any insight into this, but that's kind of just what I think. So fantastic question. If other people have thoughts about that, please put it in the comments. Okay, Robert asks, my org is planning to provide customer support via phone, calls, and hotline. I was tasked to find the best contact center solution that has the best two-way integration with JSM. Can you advise? Oh, I'm going to copy that down because I like the question. I don't have an answer for it right now, Robert. I will copy that down though. And if I find something, I will find you on LinkedIn. Private message me your email address if you can in the chat. Okay, sorry, I couldn't answer it. Next question. Do you have a guide for how you assess your incoming requests consistently? So a guide or results. You can pretty much tell, is it consistent or not via Jira reporting, right? How long was the request, like using SLAs, right? How long was the request created before it was triaged, before it was solved by me? So I use a lot of reporting that, your users would use. The same features that your developers or your support teams would use in Jira to tell you if you're doing a good job, if you're meeting your metrics. I use that too. Teresa, I don't know if that answers your question. Okay, next, could you share your contact page again? Absolutely. Thank you for asking. And here's the last slide. And please feel free to connect on LinkedIn, also on Twitter, and there's my personal email address. So you have it right at jirastrategy.com. And get back to Zoom. Thanks, Joe. Josh asks, how do you manage duplicate filter names causing mapping issues in Salto since Jira Cloud doesn't seem to prevent users from doing this? So this seems to be a problem everywhere, right? And not an app specific problem. One thing is I proactively look for them. And if the same user is duplicating, I go have a little talk with the user and ask them not to do it. There's not really a way to proactively manage it. The same thing's true with custom fields. Like Jira will let you have custom fields with the same names of different types. And of course, it has its own unique ID in the database. But within Jira, that causes collisions. So for example, if a user is going to query for a custom field, and there's two with the same name, how does the user know which to use? And if the admin is going to add that custom field to a screen, I can't tell you how many times I just picked the wrong custom field, didn't realize it. And then later down the road, we have the example of some data is in this field and some data is in that field, and they both have the same name. So to me, duplication is a problem, period. I almost kind of wish Jira prevented it. It does now with some things, right? For like project keys, for example, like it checks that there's no duplication there. It doesn't check the filters in your example. So for me, and I know if there's a lot of filters, it's not going to be a fun job to do. But for me, I would proactively go look for them, um, dump them all into an Excel spreadsheet and ask Excel to find similarities. Um, that's one thing you can do. Thanks, Josh. All right, Ellie asks, I struggle with using groups or roles within a project. Do you have any best practices for managing them? Well, yeah, so they're confusing, right? It's not just you, it's all of us. So when you think of a group, um, that's a global container with one or more users. And when you think of a role, oh, wait, you said groups or rules. I'm sorry. Are you asking me groups and rules or groups and roles? What do you mean roles? All right, tell me if I'm wrong. I'm going to continue on the role speech. But roles are used within individual projects. So I can be, if I'm in a group and that group is used in multiple projects, it's used the same way. But I can be in one role in one project and another role in another project. Um, the good news is using groups and roles is much better than hard coding individual users. So always do that when you can. Um, Best practices for managing them. So, I quarterly proactively look at the membership of all roles and groups. It's not fun to do, but otherwise, who's going to do it, right? And what I see very often with my customers is they will have users who are inactive still in groups. Now, it doesn't, or in roles, it doesn't hurt Jira to do that, but it's just extra junk in the application. So I would go through and manually remove that, manage those groups. Also, you can do a little bit of group management if you connect Jira to central user management. That might be an activity worth looking into. Okay, Josh asks, what's your strategy for archiving older data? Oh, I love that. And enforcing this for the users. How do you manage the data objects owned by users that okay, so let's do these. These are all great questions, Josh. Let's do one at a time. So first, archiving older data. So if you have Jira Cloud Premium or Enterprise, it comes with actual archival functionality. So you can just click the archive button for projects and issues themselves. That doesn't archive the schemes and settings and objects. We'll get there. But you can at least archive the issue data and it'll take it out of the Jira index. So when people are searching, it's not returned. If you don't have Jira Cloud Premium Enterprise and you have Server or Data Center, free or standard and cloud, you can do what I call pseudo archive. So what I do is I go in, I do like 5 different things, but first I go in and I change the permission scheme to make issues read only. Sometimes I like get rid of all permissions so users can't make any changes. Sometimes I let users move issues out of a project that we're not going to use because they still need the issue. It needs to go somewhere. Just depends on your use case. I get rid of the notification scheme in that project because notifications won't be sent anymore, and that's not a useful object to keep around. Sometimes I change the project's name, or like I prepend the word archive in front of it. So it shows up together. Usually I do X archive. So it shows up at the bottom of the list as an admin when I'm selecting things. And then I go through and, I change the project icon to like a big scary red lock or something that makes it look like, hey, we're not using this anymore. I add a note to the summary page saying, hey, this project is archived, but we're keeping it around for legal and historical reasons. Instead, go use this project instead, and I'll give them the key and link to it. And then the last thing I do is go through and remove any schemes that are no longer needed or being used. So that's how I handle it. And enforcing it for the users is just taking away their ability to create new data or change data there. One time I had a company who used the permission scheme to hide the project and only let one person see it. That's not a good strategy. That's a better strategy for roles and groups. So instead, if you're going to actually hide a project and not delete it, change the permission scheme to like just the Jira Dash administrator group instead. So that way you're not the only person who can see that the project exists, but regular end users can't see it. Okay, so next great question. How do you manage data objects owned by users that depart the organization? Okay, so there's two ways. The proactive way is to talk to your HR department or whoever handles departing users and give them a checklist of things that the user needs to do before they go. Now, that's not always practical. Sometimes you don't have a lot of notice when people are going. Also, management can sometimes help with this, but I give them a list of things I want them to do. And things like reassign any open issues to your supervisor, change the owner to any of your boards and filters to your supervisor, close any issues you don't need, delete any filters you don't need. I just give them a list of like the 5 most important things. That's the proactive way. Do they always do it? No. The reactive way is to, when you hear that someone has left the company, go in and clean up their old objects for them. And I do that a lot. And again, not a fun task, but worth it to me to keep the application cleaner. And last question in that same group is any automation policies or methods to make this easier? Yeah, absolutely. So one thing I didn't mention in this presentation is I use an application called Catalan Studio, Katalon, Catalan. And I found this as a web developer when I was trying to test websites. And it's one of those applications that it looks at the browser and it can make clicks for you and do routines for you, right? So you can record a routine like, let's test authentication, enter username, enter password, click the submission button, right? So I used that to automate a lot of my Jira work. So for example, if I want to know how many custom fields there are, I have a couple choices, right? I can launch the custom fields page and look at the top right and see the count. I can use an app like Salto, which will show me the list. Or I can write a teeny tiny little script in Catalan Studio and it can alert me if that number is greater than 100, right? It can go and look at the browser itself and find that. So I use that to automate all sorts of stuff. And things that took me, I think I calculated it once, I was spending like 80 hours a year just on maintenance. Like I was able to get it down to seconds by running these scripts. It was fantastic. So check out Catalan. There's a free version, a paid version, and I think the free version is even okay for commercial use and it's multi-platform. Love, love, love. No affiliation with them whatsoever, but they're so helpful. Okay, sorry, Josh, that was a long-winded answer, but those were great questions. All right, Adrian asked, am I attending? Oh, tips for attending. Yes. Oh my gosh, so many. So it's okay, I'm sorry, I had to ask the question. So I am attending the Atlassian Team 25 conference. Any tips for attending? Yes, 1,000 tips for attending. I believe it's in Anaheim, California this year. On my website, jirastrategy.com, there's an article that is called something like tips for attending summit. I will screenshot this because that's not the name of it. But I do have an article on my website with tips. And especially if you're traveling internationally, I have a lot of great tips of just like how to travel and go to a conference and how to plan for it. So yes, a ton on my website. Search Summit on my website because it team used to be called Summit and the article might still be called that.
I just published the link in the comments, I think.
Oh, you found it. Thank you so much. Atlassian Summit Survival Guide. Thank you, Baptiste. Why couldn't I remember? I don't know. Thank you. Okay, next question from Teresa. Gosh, these are great questions. Thank you all so much. Question is more about order of operations. Do you have a prescribed way that you recommend reviewing requests to ensure that you consider all the same aspects and impacts as you evaluate each requested enhancement or change? And that's fantastic, Teresa. Yes, you need to have that, right? So for me, it just came with experience. In the beginning, I really had no idea what impact my changes were going to have. And I messed up a ton of things in production learning, right? But now I know, right? The 80,000th custom field I've renamed, I have my own little list, kind of like that checklist that was in the presentation of what will a custom field name change impact. And I keep that list. So when I do it next time, I can go and make sure that I'm checking all the places. Now, new places appear all the time. So I have to constantly update my methodology, update what I'm thinking about. Maybe we've added a new app and that app uses that custom field and it's not on my list yet. So I break that and I find out the hard way because the user reports it to me. Um, but definitely the best way is to try to break things in a test environment. Try to make changes, see what the impact of those changes are, and then record it, right? If you document it, write it down, make your own checklist, then you are going to miss less and less as you go. Hope that helps. All right, Alexis asks, when would you use a component? Oh, great. Over a label or automatic assignee or team? All right. So great question. And I'm going to back this up a little. Oh,
We've got a few more minutes. I just launched the poll, but feel free to take a few more questions, Rachel.
I'm going to close it because I shouldn't take the poll for myself, right? Okay, so Alexis, great question. And it's bigger than component or label, right? You always also want to consider what object should I be using to accomplish whatever the user is asking for. So I'll give you a quick example. People always say, hey, I need a new issue type. And I ask them, okay, well, great. What difference will the workflow have? Or what fields and screens will be different? Or which of all of those is going to be different in this project? And they said, well, no, we don't need that. So they're just looking for a classifier. So in that case, the issue type isn't the answer. Then I say, well, use a component, use a label, or use a custom field. And then I go down from there and I say, well, I'd like a custom field. Ask them, well, how are you going to query for this? And if they say, well, we're not going to query or report on this, then custom field probably isn't the right answer. So then that leaves you with components and labels. So now I ask myself, okay, well, am I going to do any auto assignment with this component? And to me, that's the best use of the component field. Components are project specific. They're the only field that a Jira project level admin can modify and manage themselves. And they have that assignment capability. So for me, it's like the strongest assignment and classification mechanism in a project. So I want to devote that to something smart. I don't want to just devote that to whatever values. And then labels are great and terrible for the same reason, because they're totally customizable by the user. So when reporting is less of a concern, then I sometimes, or if a custom field is not warranted, a new issue type is not warranted, the component strategy is being used for something else, then I would use a label. And of course, you can use automation to do assignment as well as components. Baptiste, do we have any time for more?
We can probably take one last question.
Okay. All right, I'll just take the next one, which is Linda's. Any tips or workaround when migrating from data center to cloud and not having automation rules fail when moved? So yes, the short answer to this is I wrote a book about it. It's 180 pages and it's free to you to download. It's on the AppFire website and it's called, oh, these names. It's the name of it is on my website too. Let me just look at my own website to find the name of it. But absolutely, you want to plan for that. And the easiest way to plan for it is to do a mock migration of just your automation rules to see what breaks and what you'll need to address, because you're going to need to make a list, right? There's no
I
way it's going to
I
be your
think
flawless.
I think I found the PDF. I put it in the comments.
Thank you so much. The Ultimate Guide to Jira Migration is the name of the book. Ah, but that's a great resource. So I would start there. I hope that helps.
All right. I think we're done for today. We're at time. Thank you so much, Rachel, for your time today. This was truly insightful. And I say that not being a Jira admin, I learned things. So it had to be even better for actual Jira folks. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Please feel free to trial Salto free 30 days. Let us know if you have any questions and hope to see you soon at another of these fantastic sessions. Thank you again, Rachel, and have a good day, everybody.